Hey guys, welcome to mathspays.com, looking at increasing and decreasing by percentage, and mainly looking at this, I guess, with respect to financial mathematics. Okay, so I'll be using the Australian dollar for this one. Now, we've already looked at finding a percentage of an amount. For example, you might have been given something like, find a nice easy one, 10% of $50. Now, hopefully without a calculator, you know that there are 10 lots of 10% in 100%. Okay, that's 100% of our amount. Therefore, if I just want 10% of it, we can just divide it by 10. Okay, which equals $5. The mathematical way, of course, will be doing 10% of $50, or 0.1 times $50, or 10 over 100, or an equivalent fraction times $50. All of those answers would still give you that $5. So that's a pretty straightforward question. So what does increase mean? Well, increase means to get bigger. Okay, so we want to make it bigger. So if I gave you the question that said increase $50 by 10%, well, the first part is to figure out, well, what is 10%? And I've just done that. We know that 10% of $50 is $5. Therefore, if I'm increasing $50 by $5, what we're actually doing is we are making it bigger. We are adding it on to get $55. What would it happen if I said to decrease $50 by 10%? Well, hopefully you know that decrease means to get smaller, which means instead of plussing it on to the $50, we would subtract it from the $50 to make it $45. So there are two different types of questions. You will either get an increasing kind of question where we are plussing the answer on, or you might get a decreasing question which we are minusing it on. Some questions you might be able to do without a calculator, some you might have to do with. Now, of course, this is the normal way of doing it, I would suggest. Okay, there is a slightly more advanced way, and certainly if you're watching this and you're in a higher class, the advanced way would be good. The advanced way looks at it as, instead of having the two separate calculations, it kind of does all of this in just one calculation. Now, how do they do this? Well, if I'm increasing, okay, what that means, it gets bigger. So let's say we're increasing by 10%. Well, that means I've got 100% and I'm adding the 10% on. So what we're actually doing, we're finding 110% of the actual amount. If you type that into a calculator, or you might use a decimal 1.1 times $50, what you'll find, it will give you the answer of $55 in that one calculation. Okay, can be really handy, and if you feel that you're up to that, then absolutely go ahead and do that. Likewise, if you're looking at decreasing, well, if you decrease 100% by 10%, what does that mean you've got left? Well, we've got 90%. So if we do 90% times 50, or 0.9 times 50, then what you'll work out, I'll do the answer to the other side, the answer will still be that $45, and it just kind of gets the calculation in one hit. As I said, this first method, method 1, okay, that's probably your usual method for most classes. But if you're looking for the advanced method, then certainly doing that calculation in one hit is great. All right, I'm going to give you a couple of questions now and see how we can go through this. So once again, with most of my lessons, guys, I'll ask you to pause it and then have a crack at this question and then check your answer. Okay, welcome back. So I'm going to go through both methods. So method 1, again, this is the method for most people in sort of year 7, year 8. We're going to find 10% of $30, okay, or 0.1 of 30, or 1 over 10, or you can even do 10 over 100 times $30. Either way will work. You might be able to do this without a calculator though, because it's 10%, which means we can simply divide this by 10 to get $3. Either way, if you use your calculator, you would still get $3. So what does increase mean? Well, increase means that we have to add. So that means we're doing our $30, we're adding on our $3 to get an answer of $33. How'd you go with that? Hopefully you got the right answer. Now, again, if you're looking for method 2, which is our slightly more advanced method, well, if I'm increasing by 10%, that means that you're adding on 10%, which means you have that 110%. So you're doing 110% times $30. Or if you're using a decimal, which is probably more preferable if you're using the advanced method, we're timesing it by 1.1. Either way, you're coming up with $33. How'd you go with that? Okay, let's have a crack at a decreasing question now. Pause it and come back to me, guys. Okay, so 15% of, so we're timesing it by $500. Now, it's a slightly more challenging question, so you're probably going to use a calculator for this question. And if you're using calculator, you can use your percentage button. You can use 0.15. I like decimals more than using the percentage button. Brings a bit more meaning to it. But of course, you can put it as a fraction as well if you really want. But I'd suggest with money, try the decimals. That's probably a better way of doing it. Either way, if we chuck that into the calculator, we get $75. Of course, there is non-calculator methods, but I'll leave that to later on. Now, it says decrease. So it means that we're subtracting the $75 away from the 500. You must make sure you have the bigger number first, of course, which gives us $425. How'd you go with that? Oh, I hope you got that answer correct. Now, of course, if you were doing method 2, okay, the more advanced method, you might subtract the 15% away from the 100% to start off with, which means, of course, you would have 85% of the amount left over. So we can find 85% of the $500, or 0.85 times $500, and that calculation will give you the $425 automatically. Again, I hope you got that question right, guys. If you're not getting the second method right, then maybe it's best to stick with that first method. Usually 2-mark questions here, 1 mark for your percentage and 1 mark for your actual answer. Well, that's where your second mark will come from. Okay, I'm going to throw at you now a more advanced question. This is certainly what we refer to as a working mathematically. Okay, a working math question. This is quite challenging, but I want you to think about it. Again, pause it and come back to me. Okay, guys. Now, usually when I'm doing this the kind of a question with my class, the very first thing that students say to me, well, how can we do this? Because we don't have an amount to start with. How do I know how much I had? And the best thing is, it doesn't actually matter. Make up an amount. Now, if I make up an amount, I'm going to be honest with you guys, I use $100 because $100 is a really easy amount to work with. So it says if I increase an amount by 10% and then I decrease it by 10%, will there be a change? Most time people say no, there won't be a change, because if you're adding 10 on, you're taking 10 away, well, it's kind of doing that, right? It's doing 10 minus 10, which equals 0 change. However, this question is a trick question, because let's actually do it with this part. Now, if I'm doing it the method 1, we're finding 10% of $100. Hopefully you know that to be $10, but if not, do it in your calculator. And then if I'm increasing it, that means I'm adding on the $10 to the $100, which means I've got $110. So after that first sort of increasing amount, we've got $110. But now what I'm going to do, I'm going to decrease it by 10%. And I wonder if you can work out what's about to happen. If you find 10% of $110, what you're going to come up with is $11. Not the $10 that you had originally, which means that when you take off, when you take off the $11 from the $110 that you now have, what's going to happen? Well, we're going to end up with $99. And often we refer to this as the missing dollar question. Okay, because you're finding a percentage of a different amount, not of the original $100. Now, of course, if you're using the method 2, which is, again, probably preferable for a lot of people, what you'll be doing is timesing the original amount, okay, that $100 that you're starting with, by 1.1, or of course you can do it 110% times that amount. That will automatically give you that $110. Then if you reduce it by 10%, well, that means you're actually finding 90% of the amount. So 0.9 times the new amount of 110 will end up with that $99. And either way, you can say, therefore, no, it is so there is a change. Sorry, not no, there is not a change. So therefore, yes, there is a change. Okay, we lose $1, unfortunately. Of course, guys, you could do that with $5, $10, $8.50 if you really want, but $100 makes it really nice. It's a usual amount to use when they don't give you an actual amount in the question. Again, that's a working method question, WM for the Australian curriculum. But anyway, guys, I hope that made a bit of sense to you. That's a focus of financial mathematics, increasing and decreasing by a percentage. If you really struggled with that method 2, guys, please don't push yourself at this time. Do method 1. That makes it easier at this current juncture. When you get into years 9 and 10, that's when you should be pushing for method 2. All right, guys, have an awesome day. Hope that made a bit of sense. If not, email me and we'll have a chat. Have an awesome day.